If you want to make your own podcast but feel intimidated by the tech barriers, then you might need Alitu. Alitu is a web app that lets you create and publish great sounding podcast episodes. It takes care of the complicated stuff, leaving you free to concentrate on what you do best, talking about your passion. Alitu, the podcast maker app, find it at alitu.com. That's ALITU.com.
What could your school do with $25,000? Hawaii Public School teachers apply for the Education Innovation Grant from Farmers Insurance Hawaii and the Public Schools of Hawaii Foundation to make your big idea a reality. The Education Innovation Grant fosters unique, innovative learning experiences benefiting teachers, students, and the greater community. The deadline to apply is May 30th. One Oahu winner and one Neighbor Island winner will be announced in October. To apply, go to farmershawaii.com/educationinnovation.
Imagine a place where students use media, creativity, communication, and critical thinking to make stories come to life. A place where authentic audiences are enlightened by the kids who live there. Hawk Media Productions at Kealakahe Intermediate School, located in Kona, Hawaii, is an example of that place where students strive daily for the summit. From school broadcasts, Hiki No stories, community spotlights, and now podcasts, Hawk Media Productions hopes to inspire other schools to get involved in meaningful learning in the community and the world. Believe it or not, all schools have the students, teachers, and community partners to be the spark for what school could be in Hawaii.
Hey everyone, this is the What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast. I'm your host, Josh Rapun. This is another in our series we call On the Road with What School Could Be. We are recording at the Entrepreneur Sandbox, an innovation space in Honolulu, managed by Box Jelly Co-working. Today I will be talking with Wasfia Nazreen, the only woman to hold the simultaneous titles of National Geographic Explorer and Adventurer. Although she is known for being the first Bangladeshi in the world to climb the 7 summits, which are the highest mountains on every continent, her passion has always been driven by causes close to her heart. She has won numerous national and global awards for her activism and commitment to empowering women through the field of adventure. She was named by Outside Magazine as one of 40 women in the last 40 years who have advanced and challenged the outdoor world through their leadership, innovation, and athletic feats, and by Men's Journal as one of the 25 most adventurous women of the past 25 years. She is the founder of OSEL Foundation, which empowers marginalized girls from Bangladesh through the outdoors. Currently, she is hard at work in California, producing a new TV series about her life as a climber and much more. Here now is part 1 of my conversation with Wasfia Nazreen. So, Wasfia, we have this format that I call 10 questions for. So today it's going to be 10 questions for you. And so we're going to jump right into question number 1. And again, these questions are drawn from your biographic material that I worked through. So I'm super excited for the opportunity to work through these with you. So question number 1, in a short 13-minute National Geographic film about your journey, you state that you needed to set yourself free and that no one could do that except yourself. So for our radio audience, set the context of that statement. What brought you to that point in your life? What led up to that moment, that revelation, those words that you spoke?
Early in my life, I had to go through a lot of obstacles. So up to the age of 7, I had a wonderful life, had a great family. And then when I was about, 7 to 11, things started to fall down between my parents. And literally, I woke up one morning to know that my mom had left the home. And then it's a really long story, but, over the course of time, I was basically left, in my culture, a woman is taken as a burden, right? A girl. And so all of a sudden I had to fetch for, figure out housing, figure out education or what was going to happen to me. And I realized, and by this time I was shifted off to another aunt's place in a different city. So this is around 11, 12. And so at that time, I realized how much of a burden I was becoming to everyone. And I realized that the only way I could, run away from that situation was to educate myself. Because if I had education, then I would be independent. And so when I said to set myself free, it was more on the ground of self-actualization. And that was very important for me. Like, I don't know how much the audience knows, but in South Asia, a girl's decision is always made by other people. We're not made to, we were never asked questions. We have this whole culture of aunties who fix your marriages even when you're like a kid, and they're telling you what to do. So critical thinking wasn't part of growing up. And it still isn't in some parts of the country, not just in Bangladesh, in all over South Asia. And so I wanted to be able to make my own decisions. And I come from a family where most of my mother's side, like my aunts, were all married off when they were teenagers. My mom was married off when she was 17, So I wanted to break that cycle, and and I knew that if I remained in that situation, I remained in Bangladesh, there wasn't probably gonna be situations that would be according to my wishes. So my way of setting myself was to not leave Bangladesh, but leave Bangladesh at that time to educate myself. So I told my aunt to put me in an English medium school. So traditionally we study in Bengali medium school, which is our native language. So English medium is more expensive. So she put me in an English medium to strategize that when I came of age to go to college and universities, I could apply abroad and just leave, And that's what I actually did. I applied all over the world in different countries. And then one college in the U.S. gave me 100% scholarship. It was a women's college. And financing was the major issue at that time. So I just called up one of my uncle who was living at that time in UK, and I borrowed enough money to buy the ticket and just some pocket money, and I said adios, and I left at the age of 18.
So what was it like when you started to realize that the freedom was yours to be had? Like, what do you recall when you started to wake up to the idea that you were free to make your decisions in the way that you wanted to make it? Like, I know it's hard to remember exact moments like that, but what was that like?
I think just that whole divorce was a great learning for me, because I saw from my mother's side and my father's side, and I didn't, because my mother was super talented. She was like, back in the 70s, she was a world music jockey. She was a yoga teacher. She had all this. She was a musician, and her talents were cut short. And I think even though, I was abandoned, it made me reflect, because I wasn't a rebel before all this happened, That situation gave me a deep, it's difficult at that time, especially when you're at that age, before you've actually gotten your period, or, like that age is so sensitive for a girl, and I had no parents at that time. I think, but in the long run, when I look back, if my mom hadn't left, I would never become who I am today, So I have a lot of gratitude for everything that happened at that time, because it made me reflect that I have this freedom today because of everything that she did, the way she did, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. My daughter lives in California. Her name is Emma. She's in her first year as a kindergarten teacher, so it's pretty awesome for me as a former educator to have my child decide to become a teacher. But Emma and I, over the many years that we grew up together, used to talk about silver linings, and that we always tried really hard to identify silver linings. If something was going off the rails, we would start to think about, like, what's the silver lining of this? And it sounds like what happened with your mom, that you realized that there was a silver lining despite how painful that was.
Yes, I mean, I'm not saying that what she or how she did it was right.
Yeah.
But when I go back to Bangladesh and when I grew up, I see what my fellow classmates became, and they're just living, like because of those experiences, I have gone through this epic journey of finding myself, which we don't know what may have happened, but I'm just saying that. So when I actually, many years later, because I hadn't talked to my mom for almost 17 years till I found her in another city. And then this was kind of around before I had climbed Everest. And so when I reached the summit, she was the first person I called to thank her when I reached the top of the world. She didn't pick up because it was too early in the morning. But, I had a profound gratitude, even towards my dad. Their actions weren't right. I'm not justifying that their actions were right, but I'm just saying that they're still my two biggest teachers in life because, their actions set off all these series of events and consequences. And, I also became, like, I studied psychology, which was my mom's profession. I became a yogini, like all these things that I pursued on my own has spiritual connections with her. So, and there are many things that my father exposed to me during my early childhood. For example, he was working in shipping. I grew up in the Bay of Bengal, right near Sundarbans, which is the largest mangrove forest where the Bengal tigers are. I was like everything with exploration and travel. My father was, the one who put that seed in me, right? So I think as a human, we tend to always focus on, if there's like 9 things that are good and 1 thing that's bad, we focus on the bad thing, and we don't always remember from the eyes of gratitude. And
right.
And it's not always easy. I'm not saying I'm always in that state, but when I'm in deep reflection and coming from a place of wisdom.
Right. Okay, so that's perfect segue to question number 2.
Yeah.
So in the same National Geographic film, you speak about mindfulness and meditation. This might seem awkward, but I want to talk about these 2 concepts in the context of our modern schooling systems, which have little time for either of those.
Right.
So my worry, Wasfia, is that schools trying to be innovative are developing mindfulness programs, and even yoga and meditation programs, but are merely putting a bandage over more systemic issues related to competition and testing anxiety and siloed learning, and all the stresses that go with that. So the same might be said about mindfulness and meditation in the modern workplace. Another bandage on top of something that we don't want to address, which is what those environments are really like. So what are your thoughts about that?
I have a lot to say on that note, because I think I think it's not just schooling system, it's the entire culture of from externally, how we measure success in life, right? We are taught to set certain goals. Like, people think that my summits were the goals, right? And when I made it to the summit, that was my achievement. I don't see my achievement that way. I see my achievements internally, what were the mountains I had to climb to reach that point, if that makes sense. So I think, meditation, mindfulness, yoga, like, I think the children of now should be taught inner values, and that should be culture. Like, schooling should be not just in institution, it's at home, what your parents are teaching you. And if that's missing, then no matter what we achieve externally in terms of, the goal-oriented education system, there's a vacuum that remains within us. And that's why, so, if that makes sense. And I don't necessarily see it as a bandage, the way you're seeing it, because I think there are so many studies, because these are all there's been a lot of scientific research on what mindfulness does to your, whether in workplace, the corporates, are adopting mindfulness programs. There is direct connection and correlation between how a look inside and, all these journeys inside can actually benefit your external, what's the word? Your skill sets and your clarity of, and I work in very tiring and fast paced industry in Hollywood now, and I see like people are just lost no matter what fame they have achieved, how much money they make. There's just such a lack in their inside. And speaking of children, if children were taught mindfulness at home and it was part or in school, there wouldn't be any more wars in the future, and there wouldn't be any gun violence and things that, all these other issues that we're dealing with. There are prisons who are now adopting programs, I don't know if you've seen that, like,
for sure.
What it does, because it's just another skill set that teaches you that, hey, there are going to be external events happening all the time around you, but how we deal with it is up to us, and how we react to it is up to us. And it does add a lot to, if that, yeah.
So it's not that I believe that it's a bandage. It's just that I have this worry that it's being treated as a bandage. But here's my hope. And so in a previous episode that I did with an elementary school teacher here in Honolulu, remarkable 30-year educator who's implementing mindfulness and even yoga to begin every day. And it's been spreading across her campus now because the other teachers are starting to figure out that this really has a lot of benefits. And my hope is that that kind of a shift actually will propel a shift in culture at the school away from competition and away from the factory model of schooling, and that it will open up education for the kids to be more individualistic and more of these epic adventure journeys that they can go on.
On that note, I do want to add that I know a lot of yoga teachers who are not looking internally, like there's coming from a very traditional yogic, tradition, and I practice the way yoga has been marketed in the US, and it's great, but people, even in the East, I see a lot of yoga teachers these days in the modern world. It's just a physical exercise for them. It's not an internal journey. So I think it has to be a balance with meditation, because our mind is so powerful. Like if we don't look inside, no matter what we do on the outside, it doesn't, it has to be connected, if that makes sense. And then the other point was, sorry, you said
that it might change culture in a school, that the process itself will have an impact on school culture.
Yeah. And it is having a huge impact in many, like I think several Western countries, and also this connection with nature, especially in this modern world, because we are getting so caught up in buildings, and we lost that touch with just Mother Earth, and that's very important to harness at the same time. And when you go to nature, you automatically heal, and you learn so much. In my life, when I look back, I have college degrees and I have done a lot of degrees, but a lot of the main lessons in life actually came from journeys with nature.
Right. So speaking of, perfect segue to question number 3. So your quest to climb the 7 mountains, which was a process designed to set yourself free, as we've talked about, among many other things, required that you work collaboratively with a lot of people. In the short film that I watched, that I referenced earlier, you talk about, in the moment, sometimes split-second decision-making and critical thinking, which has to be part of the culture of any climbing endeavor or adventure, right? So what I want to talk about is your development as a thinker, as a decision maker. Like we all have minds and hearts. Like how do yours work together? And how have you watched yourself almost from above, looking down on yourself, develop as a thinker as you climbed the summits and then did all the other things that you've done in your life?
And I think this applies outside the 7 summits too, just in general in life, because being in the mountains, like you'll see world-class athletes, super powerful, go to high altitude and lose their shit, if I may say, and then just like, not being able to do with high altitude, because when you go to higher altitude, your brain is functioning in a completely different setting, in lower oxygen, and all kinds of things come up. And that's what I mean about having, and your ego takes over, right? And I've seen so many people over the years lose sight of their, even like, just because we die, like people die out there because they're so goal oriented, and it's like summit. And so they're not in touch with what's happening, even there's storms coming and it's a no zone for you to go to the summit. And I've been in situations where the summit was only a few hundred meters and I had to come down to save someone's life. And I think, and I'm not saying that I was always like that, but having those experiences and seeing how people have lost themselves driven by ego. And again, this comes back to, the mind training and, wisdom and clarity that arises from training in meditation is like, you have to be able to hold that space. And the training starts even before you go to the mountain, because in higher altitude, you're literally just on survival mode, right? And meditation isn't in the code. It doesn't come unless it's like a high lama coming from, Tibet or somewhere. I haven't reached that level, but I have had climbing partners in life where that person would have put me and the rest of the team's life in, just because he wanted to reach to the summit. And we know, and, I guess as women, we're more intuitive and more connected. And so all in all, it's been a great lesson, a humbling process, because we're human, we all have ego, and but being able to watch that ego, and being able to function from a place of wisdom is the key.
Mm-hmm. And I think what I'm picking up from you is that, and I'm going to contextualize this in terms of education now, where education is going. So when you talk about problem-based learning, project-based learning, challenge-based learning, inquiry,
critical thinking,
all of that kind of stuff, I think a lot of the conversation is around, well, they'll gain these critical thinking skills, these decision-making skills while they're doing the project. But what I'm hearing from you is before you climb the mountain, you have to do training.
Yeah.
And so we have to train kids to think critically and make these kinds of decisions, sometimes even before we put them into those kinds of environments where they're collaborating with other people and where the oxygen gets a little thin because the pressure is kind of on. Does it feel like that?
Yeah. And like, for example, the 7 summits was a 4-year-long journey because of but the first 5 of the mountains I had climbed in 1.5 years, less than 1.5 years. And these are really like Everest itself was 2.5 months. And so, but I was going back to back, doing all this. And then I had a frostbite case, and I had 7 surgeries, and it was a long, draining 9 months of recovery. And when I went back to my spiritual teachers, all they said was, you were going too fast, So indirectly telling me that you're not learning from this experience. You're not reflecting. So during those 9 months, it was a deep, profound, and which I was just chasing. I was like, oh, I got to finish this. And so, and then fundraising was a huge issue from Bangladesh for me. Like, it's really expensive. So it took me 4 years to finish, but in between, and even before the 7 summits, even after the 7, I had to go through a lot of training. And it's not like, oh, I've just done this training and it's over. Our entire life that's how I see it, as school of learning, right? We learn till our last breath. And so it's not, oh, just because I've done the 7 summits or some other mountains in the Himalayas, it's not always going to be like, oh, I can still go up. And there might be time in our lives and a lot of mountaineers actually deal with it. Like it's a degeneration disease when they can't go above 4,000 meters. There's actually a saying that climbers become dumb and dumber as you go more into higher altitude, because you're losing memory and brain cells at a rate faster than the body can reproduce. Anyway, but that's another topic. But what I was, if that makes sense, like, totally. It's an ongoing training before, after, like each of my expeditions. And even because now I take, people onto not that extreme conditions, but I take them, I've led many journeys to Everest Base Camp. That is a lot for this. That's like a lifetime achievement for many people, right? But when I create those, I train them for almost 8 months before we actually go, because, and it's not just high altitude training. It's just setting the mind, the intention. And I think motivation and intention, setting that right is key with anything in life. Like, why are you doing this? If you want to be an artist, why are you becoming, because it's very easy to get derailed.
Yeah. So I think what I would want to do is have you back for another episode of this podcast where we can talk just specifically about learning from mistakes and from failure.
Right.
And in your context, climbing the 7 summits, mistakes that can be, life-threatening. But that we'll have to set aside for a second. We're going to move on to question number 4, which is actually a perfect segue as well. So, Wasfia, I've always been fascinated by Sherpas. And when I taught at an all-girls school, La Pietra, Hawaii School for Girls here for 8 years, I started to think about myself not as a teacher, but as a Sherpa. And so it's really cool to have this opportunity to talk to you about this today. Given our radio audience is likely made up of educators and education leaders, I want to explore the idea of modern teachers transforming themselves away from being that sage on the stage who's just delivering information to the kids and then testing them on it, to being a Sherpa, meaning, kids are all climbing great mountains in one way or another. What in your experiences can you share about making that transition from teacher in that more modern sense to climbing guide, to Sherpa for kids as they move forward on their learning journeys? I guess I'm also looking because in watching that film and talking about your guides and very special relationships with them, and you lost one, and all of that I was very moved by that, and just thinking about how you make a transformation into being that kind of guide for another individual or groups of individuals.
So before I start, I do want to because this has been a subject of controversy especially in the Himalayan world, is like referring to someone as a Sherpa. And Sherpa people don't necessarily take it respectfully because they haven't been credited. Even Tenzing Norgay, who was the first person to lead Sir Edmund Hillary to the top, even his grandchildren are still fighting for credit. And he hasn't. So it's a little sensitive issue. And I actually started out as an activist and a nonprofit NGO worker for Sherpa people and Tibetan people's rights before I became a climber. And I have a very close relationship with them because, I worked with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan people and the refugees. So Sherpa people actually originally came from Tibet. Sherpa means coming from the east. And so their language, their culture, their spirituality is all very Tibetan. And so because I spoke Tibetan and I learned, understood the same culture, and because I was working for someone who, in their eyes, is their God or the Buddha, living Buddha, I have a lot of privilege and I've been welcomed in their life. But I know what you're saying. And I think, having said that, there's an ongoing effort still, and actually there's a really nice documentary called Sherpa that people can watch. And I actually never went to a climbing school, which many people go to become a climber. I was taught, hands-on by very legendary Sherpa people. Some of them have passed on. And I lived in an altitude of 5,000 to 6,000 meters for work. And so I got very lucky. Back on those times, I wasn't trying to be a mountaineer. It's just something that, there are no bars up there. So over the weekend, you just go climb a mountain. That's how I was very lucky to start my career in the Himalayas, where most climbers start their career in other mountain ranges. And Himalaya is their end, the higher mountains are kind of their end game, right? So this was in my early 20s, mid 20s, and I learned a lot of wisdom from them. And I think to answer your question, I think you saw the film, and Nima's daughters are now part of my foundation, and I have a very close relationship with them. But when Nima had passed, and if I can just share the story to answer your question, is I I was at a place, and in my life too, I overcompensate too much, coming from a place of, if that makes sense, when I took care of my dad later on when he had a heart attack, and for other people's sorrow and mistake, and that's kind of my personality. But when Nima passed, I really had to look back and see, like, I don't want to be the person that his wife and his children depend on all the time. They need to be self-sufficient. So what we did was, along with several other friends, we made her, his wife, Thukpa place, which is, noodles, like Momo place. And even for her, who had just moved from the Everest region to Kathmandu, the city, being able to deal with that and because it's a completely different environment, was a huge mountain that she had to climb. She was illiterate, but we gave the rent money and, to just initially just helped her financially, but she had to independently work on her own. And, and then, the first daughter was taken by another school, and initially I supported, but also not making it very clear that, like, at some point you need to be the one to learn from this experience and stand up on your own. And look at this now in 2020, they're flourishing. I still provide them with several, like, medical help and, whatever they need, but they had to learn, because in our culture, it's very common to just depend on someone else if you give too much, if that makes sense. So what I'm saying is, like, I think
your reservation is ending soon.
I think it's important for educators to, and this is something I practice in my foundation too, is like the girls had me as a role model, but I can't always be the role model. They need to find people from their own community that they can look up to as role models, and they need to see themselves as role models, if that makes sense. It's just not just girls, but young adults or young youth in general has to find that strength within themselves.
Yeah.
And not put us on a pedestal, if that.
Yes, yeah. For sure. And it's super interesting to me to make the shift to becoming someone who's like, what are the subtleties of being a guide rather than somebody who does it or just, tells you what to do.
Right.
But helps you, stays with you along the journey
right.
to help guide you. Like there's a fountain of knowledge that's there, but you don't just drop it on somebody.
Right.
You have to be with them as they go along.
Right.
And that's the part that I'm starting to focus on now. And looking at education redesign is the role of the teacher in that case as becoming more of a guide in that way.
Even in my life, I've looked up to guides as like whether it's a spiritual guide or a mountain guide or, you put everything like this guide is going to solve things for you, right? So you don't really, if you're performing from that angle as a guide, you're not actually teaching or passing on your information. You're just creating a codependent situation where that person isn't growing. And I see this even when I take, very upscale LA crowd. They're just they think that you're going to figure it out for them.
Right.
Even older people. So totally.
In some ways, it's more about holding back from what you want to say.
You're right.
And allowing the person to move forward with the adventure.
And allowing that space for them to grow.
Okay, so we're going to move on to question number 5. So we are individually and together on a series of journeys. And yours was to climb a series of epic peaks, among many things. My current journey is to support education, innovation in Hawaii. So what do you do? And by the way, I'm referencing a moment in the film where I saw you writing in a journal. There's this really cool shot where you're sitting in a really cool space and you're writing. So what do you do specifically to document your thoughts, your feelings, your observations and insights along your path, day to day, hour to hour? What thoughts can you share with educators about documenting their education journeys, whatever that journey happens to be? And, what tools do you use? What's the value of that documentation itself as you go along through your journey?
I actually journal a lot, and not just writing, but sometimes because I'm always in situations where there might not be even the wind is so high you can't record, so or record thoughts with a pen and paper. So I use my phone to just record audios. And actually, currently, right now, I'm working on my memoir based off of those journal writings and recordings and random thoughts that I had, because, they come as thoughts, but then what's the lessons, what are the learnings? And so the entire book is based off memories and lessons that I've learned. And I'm also working on a TV show where most of the script is from the learnings because I also, given that I have really bad memory, just from all these journeys in the Himalayas. So, and then I would often call up friends who saw me during certain times in my life, because we tend to think from our own perspective. I'm very open to seeking out, not just friends, even if people hate me, like get their perspective of what they thought of me or whatever situation I was in. And I think in education, I think that's really important to get other external perspective. Because people
are the repository of memory.
Right. And orbital perspective, which is a term used by astronauts very often, is like the view from the top, right? Because we get so caught up in our own journeys that we lose sight of objective thinking, right? And so oftentimes in our meditation, we also have this visualization. We visualize a lot in training. So when I say meditation, it's not just like meditation. There's a lot of, recitations, exercises, and a lot of it is based on visualization. And say, for example, we're sitting here in this booth, and then just go above, like just imagine yourself going up, and, it comes with long-term practices, like really seeing yourself from an orbital perspective, from how an astronaut would view. And then you'll see that how we're all so interdependent. And I feel like we lose that side when we're so caught up in our own, just thinking in our own mind, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, I've had many examples where I've pulled up to that 10,000 foot level and just looked down and tried to examine the ecosystem that I'm operating in that moment. And I'm also struck by what you say that, journaling is one thing. You could be blogging. There's many tools that you can use to record your thoughts. But one of those tools is actually sharing with people what you've been through. And they become a repository in a way that you can reach back to later if you're going to be working on something that requires that memory. And it sounds like you're doing that. In
the last couple of years, because I'm in a place in life where I'm doing a lot of storytelling, and I want to be able to say, say it from an authentic place. So, a lot of my friends have helped me. I would just get on a call, set up a call, and just have those conversations. And even if it's difficult, like how they perceived my growth at that level where I was stuck. And I learned a lot about myself. And not everyone is, and it's, even for me, it's difficult sometimes. It's not an easy process.
Right. But it must be really fun to be working on this TV show.
Yeah.
And that in a way, your memories of what's happened over the climbs to the 7 summits, it shifts in some way as you re-interact with your journals and with the ways that you've recorded memory and with the people who are with you.
It is very therapeutic. And also, so just for the record, I finished in 2015. And since then, I've been doing other mountains and stuff. But during the 7 summits, there was a different kind of spotlight on me, like, because I was doing it for Bangladesh's 40 years of women's progress and all that. So there was a lot of expectations, right? And so there's a whole shift in when I go to the mountains now. No one's looking. So I'm like on my own, having a different kind of freedom in my mind where I don't have to face a whole bunch of media when I come down, or, so only in the last 2-3 years, and now that I've moved location, I've based myself mostly out of LA, I have the space and perspective to just get a different perspective, and not just the 7 Summit, but just my entire life. And so these storytelling projects, whether it's TV or book writing, it's been very therapeutic. And I'm finally being able to look back, even my childhood, from a whole different, a fresh perspective, Because when I'm in Bangladesh, it's just, we have 170 million people. So it's like literally there is no space. And when you're someone in the public eye, there's just, your brain's not, or mind's not functioning from a very authentic self that serves you or yourself, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, it does.
yeah.
Very cool. Hey, everybody. We're going to split this episode into 2 parts. So stay with us. This is the end of part 1, and we'll be back with part 2 very shortly.